Welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derek, and today we are getting into another Strixhaven deck tech, and I'm very excited because I feel like I finally figured out which of the schools I most identify with. There's just so many cool aspects of all of them that every time I kind of, especially with the Command Zones like trailers they put out, every one of them looked awesome, so I kind of was like, oh, this is the one for me, but I think I've narrowed it down. And I think Prismari is the one for me. I am loving Prismari so far. Basically every legendary creature between the precon and the main set just looks so damn cool. And today there's probably going to be more than one Prismari deck built on this channel, but we're going to start with Zaffai, Thunder Collector, Thunder Conductor, Zaffai Thunder Person. And we're going to get into just how awesome this deck can be. Now, this is actually the face commander for the precon, so this is not going to be an upgrade path for the precon itself. I kind of just built it from scratch. But really, the way this deck is built, you can just pick your favorite cards and add them to the precon if you want, and it's still going to be awesome because these precons seem pretty solidly built. So you can kind of pick and choose, but this deck seems amazing. Kind of reminds me of my girl Vial Smasher. We'll get into that in a second. We're going to be trying to make things conducted, collected, and exploding everywhere. Phrasing in this deck. So I'm very excited. But before we get too far into this, you're going to want some of the cards in this deck. You might just want the precons because these precons seem awesome, and head on over to TCG Player. TCG Player is amazing. Any type of card you want, foiling, alternate arts, precons, anything, sealed, everything you can need, you can find on TCG Player. And if you use the affiliate link down below in the description, it'll help support the channel. In the process, we really do appreciate all the help. So let's just jump right back into Zaffai, because Zaffai is amazing. Zaffai is 2 red and a blue for a 1/4 human shaman that has Magecraft. So whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, this card triggers, and the triggers are amazing. So just if you cast any instant or sorcery, right away you're going to scry 1. If that CMC is 5 or greater, you're also going to create a 4/4 red and blue token. And then if it's 10 or greater, you're also going to just go ahead and Vial Smasher and throw 10 damage to an opponent at random. Y'all know how much I love Vial Smasher, so you should already know this caught my attention and how just freaking cool this is, that we can get all these triggers and they stack. So if you do cast that 10 CMC spell, you're throwing the damage, getting the token, and getting to scry. But I think my favorite thing about this card is the way these effects are ordered, how it can help you set you up throughout the game. Early game, when you're casting a lot of your lower CMC stuff, you can go ahead and scry, and that way if you have that giant CMC spell on top of your deck, you can just scry that away for later. As you get to the mid game, when stuff starts ramping up, you're going to start just basically pooping tokens out onto the board to be able to defend yourself or attack if you get in the right situation. And then late game, you're in a position to just throw damage around and really just take people out and finish the game off, which I love. Now, I didn't go any type of crazy storm route or anything like that with the deck, which I'm sure you can, especially with all the copy and triggers and stuff like that. I kind of went just a pseudo control big stompy instant and sorcery build, which again probably shouldn't be surprising considering most decks I build try to be stompy. So yeah, we're trying to cast really big dumb spells, get big dumb triggers, and just throw damage at people. I guess if Vial Smasher throws vials of Dragonfire, Zaffai looks like a musician, so maybe you're just throwing tubas and stuff at people. Whatever it is, it's going to be a good time while you're doing it. And then with the creatures, there's really 3 that stick out to me. 2 that kind of have copy-ish effects to get triggers off of your commander, so stuff like Dualcaster Mage and God Eternal Kefnet are phenomenal in this deck and just allowing you to get extra triggers, get extra value. But Varen is also so good in this deck, which is also in the precon. This is essentially Panharmonicon for your Magecraft stuff, and it is just so powerful in this deck, especially late game. It can essentially act as that Stronic Resonator for your Vial Smasher or whatever copy ability thing you're using. It's going to do that for your commander in this deck at just 3 mana. It's such a powerful card in here. It in and of its own right is an awesome commander and probably one I'll be building soon, but in its supporting role in this deck, it can do work. I'll also throw in a quick mention to Gutter Snipe. I do love Gutter Snipe's role in this deck because while our commander does so much work, it is fragile. It is a 4 CMC commander that, if killed a few times, can get hard to recast. So having something like a Gutter Snipe to either early game get the damage flowing or late game try to finish people off is really important. And it's just the type of deal where we'll be casting so many things that if anybody who's played Gutter Snipe knows that damage adds up fast, and this is a great kind of backup-ish commander in the deck to get some work done. We actually are running a Planeswalker and Rouse Storm Conduit, and yeah, not a surprise here. It cares about casting or copying instants and sorceries. It can copy instants and sorceries. This is just a very good value card. Y'all, I say it a million times, not a super big fan of running Planeswalkers, but this is one that just synergizes so well, it kind of feel bad to leave it out. And then we'll jump over to the enchantments, and with those, again, these are all these categories I'm kind of just running through because it's all about instants and sorceries. Everything else has just so few cards in it. With the enchantments, we have metallurgic summonings, which again kind of acts as a backup commander, which will allow us to get value off of these instants and sorceries to make an even bigger token army. And really, you could take this deck in a direction where you care more about tokens because we're in red with things like Perforoses and Impact Tremors and things like that. I really didn't want to go that route just because I build mostly token decks, so I wanted to try something a little different. But even this, just the extra value can allow us to get enough of a presence with combined, with the ability of our commander to really either have great protection on the ground or get enough stuff to start swinging in and doing work in that way, not just with the commander triggers. And then the other one is just Mystic Remora. I really stopped running Rhystic Study in most of my decks, mainly because I just miss all the triggers, and then I feel bad for asking if people are going to pay one all the time, and then because I feel bad, I just miss more triggers. Mystic Remora is easier. Nobody's paying for it. If you want to pay for it, tell me. I'm just going to assume you're not and just draw a card off of it. Plus, it's a cute little fish, so that's always a win. And then the artifacts are just ramp. We are trying to just ramp as much as possible because we're trying to get to those 10 CMC spells. So just a bunch of mana rocks. Really, the coolest ramp, though, is not the basic mana rocks. Obviously, we have the arcane signets and the soul rings and the signets and all that. But I really do love, I've talked about Midnight Clock a bunch. Is probably my favorite mana rock. I love just the countdown of getting to wheel and reshuffle everything. Now, it's probably not the best, but it is super fun. And in a deck like this, where we are trying to cast a bunch of things and ramp up, it's not bad to be able to refill your hand. It's a really cool feeling when you play it to know, okay, I have like this turn clock to where I'm going to just refill to 7, so you can cast things kind of without being as scared of having to hold things back and overextending, which is a cool feeling. But it's synergized as well, and I'm loving, there's this whole category now of 3 CMC rocks with really cool abilities that I just absolutely love. And I think in more of my decks, I'm going to start cutting efficiency and going more in these cool, interesting 3 CMC rock routes, because I've had such a good time playing them. Skyclave Relic, I don't think it's in this deck, but I put it in some other decks. They're so much fun. And there's a new one in Strixhaven as well. I'm really going to start moving in this direction just because it puts almost little mini games with a lot of these within the game, and it's always a good time when you can get that thrown onto your ramp package. It's just basically free fun the way I look at it. So I always am trying to squeeze those in. But now, the two that really stick out the most to me are going to be Primal Amulet and Pyromancer's Goggles, because these just synergize way too well. The ramp you get from the Primal Amulet and the cost reduction is insane, and then when it flips, you can copy things, and Pyromancer's Goggles is essentially in that same category. These are just super, super powerful cards that are going to add mana, ramp us, but really, almost more importantly, double our triggers for our commander and really just get stuff going off. I didn't go super heavy into the storm route with 1,000 Year Storm and Swarm Intelligence and the higher CMC doubling effects, but we have enough of the cheaper effects, stuff like these, to where we can really get stuff moving quick. Now with these sorceries, really they fit into 3 main categories. We have a lot of our early game low CMC stuff that we want for setup, or even if we have our commander out later game, give us some value. So things like Ponder or things like Faithless Looting, these are great because they're going to give us value whether or not we have our commander out. But if we do, that little extra scry doesn't hurt. It's cool. It gives us something to do early game besides just play mana rocks, and it lets us set some stuff up. Now we have the other extreme with really high CMC spells, stuff like Apex of Power or Time Stretch, that are just giant, massive, explosive effects that also trigger that 10 damage trigger for our commander, which is amazing. We don't want too many of these now, because yeah, we can scry them away through other effects, but too many of these in a deck is just too inefficient. And even in something like this that I consider a stompy spellslinger deck, it's really hard because if you just end up with a handful of these, it's bad. What I want most of these instances and sorceries, but specifically the sorceries, to be are flexible. We want to be able to do different things. We see this flexibility through stuff like Seagate Restoration and Shadow Skull Smashing with their MDFCs. These are amazing. Early game, they're just a land drop, and if we have them late game, we can cast these big spells, especially ones in X spell, for varying values, get a big explosive effect, and then kind of just move on. These are wonderful. But really the peak of flexibility in this are going to be our X spells. So we have so many different things we can do. The 2 finales that fit into these colors with Finale of Promise and Finale of Revelation are amazing and do everything we want in this deck. Not to mention that even early game, they're not bad. They might not be as great. We won't get all the triggers, but it does something, which is more than can be said if we just had a bunch of just 10 CMC spells, which is hard to do. We have a bunch of explosive X spells, stuff like Epic Experiment, and there's just so many options we have in these X spells to where late game, they can win the game for us. But even then, early game, it can give us something to do. We have so many potentially explosive effects in this deck through these X spells that we don't have to worry about just hanging on to the one card all game. I run certain decks with like Finale of Revelation where I will refuse to cast it if X is not 10 because I feel like I'm missing out on so much value because I want to get that untap. I want all these. We don't have to worry about that. We got so many goodies in this deck that even if it's turn 4 and whatever, we're drawing a couple cards off of it, it's not as much of a feel bad. We got plenty of other stuff to come late game that will give us those big explosive turns. And with the instants, our instant speed stuff is much more, whereas our sorceries are kind of our big explosive and setup effects, our instants are very much our interaction. Obviously, we're just going to be running our cheap interaction like Ponkify and Chaos Warp, things like that, because we're in red and blue, and those are just amazing. But really, the two biggest categories in our instants that are going to take up the majority of these are copy and fork effects, which we'll get into, and then our removal package, which we're going to play a lot of overcosted stuff, which I love. So we'll start with our copy effects. Fork's expensive now, I don't know how, but forget Fork, Reverberate, Expansion, Explosion, all these types of effects, Reiterate. There's so many copy effects now that we have access to. Putting a handful in our instant slot is really easy to do. The reason why these copy effects are so good in this deck is because our commander specifically cares about the 10 CMC for 10 damage. If we cast a spell for 20 CMC, we're still only throwing 10 damage. So it's much, much better for us to cast something and copy it to get the double trigger from Magecraft as opposed to just casting one massive thing. You know, if we cast something for 10 CMC and then use our fork, it's just better than casting a 12 CMC spell. So having a bunch of these forks available when we get to that late game portion is amazing, because then all we want to spend is that 10 mana with our X spells, and then we can just use as many forks as we have access to, essentially. So that is an amazing thing. Not to mention, for a lot of these, we can copy our opponent's stuff. You can get some tricky stuff with it, and that's a lot of fun. Now, for our removal package, this deck is like the dream for me. I love really inefficient counter spells. Now, they're not good. I probably shouldn't love them. But stuff like, Spell Swindle and Desertion and Sublime Epiphany and Mystic Confluence, all of these 5 and 6 CMC counterspells are the majority of the counterspells I run. I love these things to death, and I know that there's better things out there, but I will not stop. I have so much fun with these. You get all these splashy effects. Sometimes you get to draw cards. Sometimes you get to steal stuff. You make treasures. It makes countering things into a much more fun experience for me. So I love these, and now I have an excuse because these will get our commander triggers to go ahead and get those tokens. This is the type of deck where we're going to be holding up mana a decent amount. There's plenty of turns where we're just going to, draw past because of the instant speed interaction we have. And these 5 CMC counter spells are just better because essentially, yeah, you can counter for 1 or 2 mana, but when you throw in maybe getting treasures or stealing things with the also added on benefit of getting those tokens to populate our board, it makes them slightly less feel bad when you're spending all this mana on just one counter spell. So I think it's a great excuse to run these. And just in general, I know it's not efficient. Try running these in more decks. They're super fun. It feels ridiculous tapping so much mana to counter something, but it is a good time. And I think it does make for cool swings in addition to the feels bad of a regular counter. And then with the mana base, it's super simple. I would say, honestly, if you start with the precon, just keep it the way it is. You really don't need to change much. I don't even know. Mirror Pool might be in the precon. I don't know if it is. So maybe throw that in, but it's kind of inefficient and we have enough copy effects, so that's not super important. Yeah, mana base, even if you were running literally all basics, the deck would run just fine. Nothing to worry about there. Maybe a Homeward Path. If you happen to have a Homeward Path sitting around, do that, because it would feel really bad. This deck does kind of really like its commander, so maybe a High Market as a sack outlet or a Homeward Path, yeah, your commander getting stolen would feel really bad. So maybe that, but yeah, not too much else to worry about. That is going to do it for the categories. Now let's get into the best part of every deck tech, and in this case, the most explosive part, and that is the game-winning step. How are you about to win the game with this deck? And there are really 3 main ways we're going to do this. The first way is going to be just raw damage with our commander's triggers. This is just going to be so much fun. Late game, like I said, it's basically like playing Vial Smasher. And as you play the deck, you can kind of decide. Maybe you want to wait till the late game to even bring your commander out. Maybe it's not worth those mid-game elementals and you can just defend yourself like a control deck. Or maybe you find that just getting your commander out there and getting all that value is worth it. There's kind of a few different ways you can kind of go about that, as when you want to bring your commander out. I'm kind of greedy. I just want to get it out as fast as possible and start getting triggers. So that's the way I'm going to do it. I don't know if it's the right way, but late game, either way, when you have access to your commander, throwing that 10 damage at random as someone who, again, plays Vial Smasher, 10 is a lot. That adds up so fast. By the time you get to the point of throwing that damage, people's life totals are getting low, and 1 or 2 is enough to just take someone out. And yeah, our commander has a finisher built right in, which I love. Spellslinger decks can kind of dirtle sometimes, so I do like having kind of that direct route to victory right on the commander. And then the second way to win the game is kind of a more traditional spell slinger route. And this just works really well in a lot of red blue decks. And it's through stuff like Mizzix's Mastery and Epic Experiment. And this is just through, whether in the case of Mizzix's Mastery, where you're just casting a million things from your graveyard, or Epic Experiment, where you're just dumping a bunch of mana in and casting a million things, you can have such an explosive turn. And if your commander's out, things get even more out of control with this, where you just do so many things at once, you just win the game. And this is the type, especially like I keep saying in the late game, life totals get low, board states get kind of clogged up. You could just bam, out of nowhere, dump a bunch of mana and just take everyone out with the value you get casting 8, 9, 10 cards in a turn. This is going to be super fun, and especially if you go more of the storm route and kind of lean into these casting a million cards in a turn, you can even lean deeper into these type of explosive turns. But I think even just getting like a bite-sized preview with these in the deck is a great kind of backup win con if your commander is not immediately available. And then now, of course, it is time for our weekly trip to Phyrexia. Y'all didn't think I could miss this. Y'all know the real reason why I picked Zaffai. 10 is the magic number. 10 is the most beautiful number. I love 10. And 10 is the number of perfection. And the fact that Zaffai just happens to throw 10 damage at someone is just so perfect. It's like they meant for this to happen. And we're throwing a grafted exoskeleton on there so we can infect and bring our opponents to completion, phrasing, and bring them to be one with Phyrexia. This is so perfect. Somebody at R&D definitely is an infect fan, and there's no way they just picked 10 out of nowhere. Forget that it's a round number and all that. It was meant for Phyrexia. It is just such a powerful effect late game to be able to put on that grafted exoskeleton, throw 10 infect at somebody, and just bam, somebody's out of the game. That is insane. It is, it makes me so happy. I don't know if it was an accident or on purpose, but Zaffai is a wonderful infect commander. You can even also throw in a Corrupted Conscience if you wanted to give more infect into the deck, which I probably should. I'm starting just a little light, just one little drop of Phyrexian oil in the deck. But that's enough to really give you that late game finisher in case there's that life game player, stuff gets out of hand. You got a way to go ahead and finish the game either way. That's going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. Prismari is amazing. There is just, as I was building this deck, I had to stop myself from actively building some of the other commanders so I could just pay attention to one thing. My brain was bouncing everywhere. They seem amazing. Let me know in the comments down below what y'all's favorite school is. What school do you think is right for you? And what are your favorite commanders from Prismari if you are also a Prismari person such as myself? There's so much fun stuff to come in Strixhaven. This set is so damn cool, so don't worry, plenty of deck techs. I will try to stray over to the other schools a little bit in between all these Prismari commanders I'm doing. We'll see what I make time for. As always, a huge shout out to the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. Just thank you so much for believing in what we do. And make sure Saturdays at 8:30 Eastern you're coming and hanging out with us for Commander Petty. Come hang out, talk trash, point out all our misplays. It is always such a good time. But there's plenty of fun stuff to come. But until then, I will see y'all next time.